Good morning, and welcome to a continuation of Beowulf. We're picking it up in Fitts XXIV-XXVIII. Let me get in. I know it doesn't mean anything to you, but there's a big tag I had to get off the screen there so I can see what this looks like. This 24 begins, or actually the end of 24 leads into the so-called sermon. Yid is the Old English word, but it's usually translated as sermon. It's a long speech of advice, some of the wisdom literature. So it's one of the things that makes Beowulf epic-like. Again, the comparison to the classical genre of epic might be hasty, but one thing that it does have is that it's a kind of a compendium of Old English wisdom, and so this advice, a kind of a mirror for princes, if you understand that Renaissance convention that came later. It begins at the end of chapter book Fitts number 24. This advice from Hrothgar, line 1705. I'll read this as example. Also, if you take a look at the text, both in the translation and in the Old English, the lines are longer, and we don't know why. Hypermetric verse, as it's called, occurs infrequently in Old English poetry. It seems to have had some kind of rhythmic purpose or effect. Well, that's just a conjecture. Who knows? Maybe it's just bad, a couple of bad lines of poetry. Maybe it's bad textual tradition. That's unlikely. Actually, they seem to be intentionally composed this way. How were they received by the original listeners? We don't know, but here's Hrothgar's advice to Beowulf, line 1705. Firmly thou shalt maintain mighty strength with mood of wisdom. Love of mine will I assure thee, as a while ago I promised. Was not Heremod thus? And this is the beginning of a kind of a negative exemplum. Remember, we talked about the so-called digressions that come about in Beowulf as moral exempla, examples of heroes of the past that you should be like. So Beowulf is celebrated as a hero like Siegfried, and so we describe the deeds of Siegfried to show that. But now this is a contrast here. Heremod was a bad king, so Hrothgar is telling Beowulf how to be a good king, which is ironic because Beowulf, might be 18, 20. We don't really know. He's a young man. We're not expecting him to be king, but he does become king, in fact. And so we give the negative example of the bad king Heremod. And again, if what is it that makes a good king in this culture? Generosity, largesse, giving out rings, having Beershibas, having the wine hall. So what would make a bad king then? Stinginess, so that his own thanes won't stand up for him because he never gives them anything. Was not Heremod thus, the offspring of Edgewale, honor shieldings, nor grew for their grace, but for grisly slaughter, for doom of death to the Danish men. Okay, so the sermon proper then is stanza 20, or Fitts number 25. And it ends around line 1785. And then the poet describes the departure of Beowulf, line 1800, a couple of lines after that. The swordsmen hastened. Adelings all were eager homeward forth to fare, and far from thence the great-hearted guest would guide his keel. In Beowulf, Adeling means more or less a warrior of a noble class. Okay, Adel is the word for noble. In later times, after the time of Beowulf, around the end of the 10th century, early 11th century, it comes to have a meaning of kind of heir apparent, a nobleman who is in line for the throne. That's in the time of Ecgbert, the grandfather of Alfred the Great, who starts that tradition. So Beowulf, one of the last things he does before he leaves the Danes is to give Hrunting to Unferth. Okay, so this is the last time we hear of Unferth. 26, fit number 26, Beowulf takes leave of the Scyldings. He specifically turns to the young prince, the son of Hrothgar, who must be about his age, and urges him to come visit me sometime. Okay, you've shown hospitality to me, let me return the favor. It's a little bit more than that. It's Beowulf giving his own wisdom. As I said, the sermon passage is called a yid, but there's little yids throughout the poem, and this is another thing that is similar to the Greek Homeric epic tradition, and that is little passages that the Homeric scholars call gnomic. They're little gnomoi, which is a word that it means wisdom. Okay, it's a Greek word, so we're not picking up on something particularly Germanic here, but this culture does have that in common with the Greek and Roman cultures, and so this gnomic passages, sometimes you'd have little passages of generic advice, like this. If thy Hreidrik, this is Beowulf speaking to Hrothgar about the Prince Hreidrik. If thy Hreidrik should come to court the Geats, a sovereign son, he will surely there find his friends. Okay, so that's the specific invitation. What follows is the gnomic passages. He says, a far-off land each man should visit who vaunts him brave. Okay, so part of the polish, part of the development of a warrior then, we're to assume, is travel. Okay, so travel maketh the man. Okay. Beowulf's reflection, line 1855, is that he's pleased with himself for having cemented the relationship between the Danes and the Geats, because previously they had feuded, and this is a reflection of that, line 1815. Thou hast brought it about, this is Hrothgar praising Beowulf for this. Thou hast brought it about that both our people, sons of the Geat and Spear-Dane folk, shall have mutual peace from murderous strife, such as once they waged from war refrain. Okay, so it's both a reflection on the former wars and a reflection that now we have the basis for peace. And then in the farewell, line 1876, we see the emotional side of the comitatus relationship. Now, Beowulf actually is, of course, in a comitatus relationship with his own king, Hygelac, but there is this temporary relationship, and even this, and so the embrace, even this is very close, and I think we see it in the battle poetry elsewhere too, that in fact, the comitatus relationship, which of course is economic and political, but it is also emotional, and I think we see that in lines like this. This is the narrator speaking about Hrothgar. Was this hero so dear to him, his breast's wild billows he banned in vain, safe in his soul a secret lodging, locked in his mind, for that loved man burned in his blood. Okay, so there is this intense love for Beowulf in Hrothgar. So the next fit, what number are we on now? XXVII, 27, and Beowulf is back with Hygelac. His very brief jaunt across the sea is described. And the digression now, we've had these moral exempla on kingship to give Beowulf both positive and negative models on kingship. And so Beowulf comes home, and he's greeted by Hygelac, and then we see Hygelac's queen Hygd. And when we see Hygd in all her beauty, that reminds us of a negative exemplum of another beautiful queen from legend in the past. Legend and history kind of merged. And her name is Thryth, or elsewhere Modthryth, she's called. So what makes her such a negative example? Well, her beauty is prideful. So, well, let's follow. Line 1920. Then Beowulf bade them bear the treasure, gold and jewels. No journey far was it thence to the giver of rings, Hygelac craving. Okay, so he goes across the sea, goes to Hygelac. Hero the king high in the hall, and Hygd right young, wise and wary, though winters few. Okay, so she's young. She's lived through few winters, but she's wise beyond her years. Nor humble her ways, nor grudge she gift to the Yattish men. Now here, humble there. By saying she's not humble, that doesn't imply pride in the negative sense that a Christian would use it, because acting like a noble woman is a good thing. Okay, but on the other hand, so she doesn't show lowness like a servant. Okay. But she doesn't go to the other extreme either. Nor Thryth's pride showed she, and that leads the narrator to think about this haughty queen, Thryth. Was none so daring that durst make bold, save her lord alone of the liegeman dear, that lady full in the face to look. Okay, so she was so prideful of her beauty that she forbade anybody to look at her. She would strike down the thanes if they dared look at her face. So that's taking the value of feminine beauty, of queenly beauty, too far. But Hemming's kinsmen hindered this. Okay, so now this is when she's a princess. This is before she's married. She has this haughtiness. But then she is tamed. So this is kind of a reading between the lines. We seem to imply that the frustration with all of this legendary background in Beowulf and in other Old English poetry is that it touches on such a rich deposit of stories that we no longer have. That it's tantalizing because we get just a glimpse and we have to read between the lines. But we know enough similar tales from other European and other world tales that this seems to be the motif of the haughty princess, and kind of also, as I was about to say before, the taming of the shrew. Olfa, the great hero Olfa, comes and marries her, and she becomes a model. Modest wife, okay, queen. And Hemming's kinsman, Olfa, does this. Fit number 28, there's a lack in the manuscript here of, there's no marker for fit number 29, but it must be in there someplace, and some editors just find a good stopping place and call fit 29 there. But the manuscript, we only have one manuscript of Beowulf, and so we're stuck with however things are numbered there. Okay. Hygelac, the retelling, what follows is the retelling of the story that we've already seen, and but we get new details. The first of which is Hygelac telling Beowulf, "Thank God you're back. I didn't want you to go in the first place." We had no idea that was the case. Line 1992. With waves of care my sad heart seethed. I sore mistrusted my loved one's venture. Long I begged thee by no means to seek that slaughtering monster. He warned Beowulf not to go. Then Beowulf tells about something else that we didn't hear about in the Danish sections, but he tells his king about it now. Oh yeah, he had a daughter too. Well, we heard about Hreidrik, but we never heard anything about Hrothgar having a daughter. And oh yeah, she's about to be married to a great hero. I was going to say Froda, but it's a son of Froda. Oft to the heroes Hrothgar's daughter, line 2020. The two earls in turn the ale cup tendered, she whom I heard these hall companions Freawaru name. So the daughter is Freawaru. Promised is she, gold-decked maid, to the glad son of Froda. Sage this seems to the Scyldings' friend, kingdom's keeper. Froda's son is named Ingeld, and that doesn't mean anything to us, except once again we get this tantalizing reference. There was a crabbed old religious leader in the Middle Ages, and he criticized his monks for instead of singing songs about Jesus and singing songs about the greatness of our God, singing songs in praise of God. Instead, they're singing vain songs about heroes like Ingeld. So actually, it was, I think, Alcuin himself. It was attributed to Alcuin in a letter, and he asks point blank, what has Ingeld to do with Christ? There's our real hero. We should stop singing these silly heroic songs about Ingeld. So he must have been important enough. This story that Beowulf alludes to, and Beowulf is looking into the future. This story, whatever it is, because apparently this marriage goes bad in ways that marriages did. Remember, one of the functions of marriage in this setup, in this very violent society, is to bring the tribes together, to settle a feud. And so this was a marriage that was designed to settle a feud, and yet it didn't work because there was some violence after that, and either Ingeld killed his in-laws or they killed him. I don't know. So this has been longer than these little sessions are supposed to be, so maybe we ought to stop there. So that stops us around Fit 28 or so, and we'll pick it up at what is labeled Fit 29, even though it starts in the middle of a sentence. Line 2040 is where we'll pick it up next time. So thanks for your patience. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next episode.